Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. So as you can see, I have started a combat and we have an attack roll here, which is successful and does damage to the enemy. And that's all stuff that we've seen before, but the next line is something we haven't seen before. It says enemy 1 is now on fire. And when we scroll down and find enemy 1 on the map of the battlefield, we can see that, yeah, there is a little display there that says that they're on fire. And this is a special feature of two Molotov weapons. There's a shoddy Molotov and I can't remember, I'll have a look it up, a better quality Molotov. And both of those do burning damage. If they hit an enemy, they set the enemy on fire and the enemy sort of keeps taking damage. And that's what I've coded most recently. And so I'd like to spend the rest of the video showing you the code that allows that to happen. So, as you probably know, if you've been following this series, most of the details about weapons are stored in WEA_OVR, short for weapon overview, and WEA_ATT, short for weapon attack. And those give details of the different weapons. Okay, the better quality one's called a Super Molotov, by the way. But actually, I decided not to store the fact that they do burning damage in this array. Because there's only two of them, it seemed easier, and because they've both got the word Molotov in them, it seemed to me that it would be less coding to just have that as a special few lines of code when we do an attack. So these two arrays are not changed. What is changed is the NME array. Because this is an ongoing effect, we need to have somewhere to store the fact that that's happening. And so what I did was I just added another slot to NME. So NME Z6 stores any burning damage that enemy Z has to take because a Molotov has hit them. Because we've got that new slot, when we set up the combat, we need to initialize that slot. That's very straightforward. We just set it to 0, of course. So the first thing is, I guess in terms of the order in which it will happen in the game, anyway, the first thing is that when someone hits with a Molotov, we need to note that that's going to do burning damage. And so that is in the section of PC side attacks, because the enemies don't have any equivalent of this. This is purely something that the humans in the game can do. We have it down here in this section that's to do with when you've hit. So we work out the attack's basic damage. We add a relevant attribute. We have the special attack for the special roll for the chainsaw that the attacker has to roll to avoid being grossed out. We have the one with the science gun. The target has to roll to avoid being shocked. And finally, we have burning damage down here. I decided to put it after whether we check if the enemy is dead, because if the enemy is dead, it doesn't sort of really matter that they're on fire as well, I guess. I suppose I could have done that to the fact with the being shocked as well, but I decided not to. I might make that change later. Anyway, so if the enemy's not dead, as the note says here, we have to work out burning damage. And how do we know whether an attack includes burning damage? Well, we use this .includes command, which looks at a variable. Sorry, I keep calling them attributes. A variable, which in this case is $X, which is text that is the name of the weapon and then a space and then the number of the attack. So it's something like pistol 1 or pistol 2. If that includes the text Molotov with a capital M, then we know that it's one that includes burning damage. So the first thing we say is if enemy Z6, that's where we're storing the burning damage. If they don't already have any, then we say enemy Z is now on fire. So why do we make this check? Well, because if they're already on fire, saying they're now on fire is a bit redundant. So if they're sort of newly on fire, we give a message that says they're on fire. And either way, we add to enemy Z6. We plus equals means its new value is its current value plus whatever's over here. WEA underscore ATT X2. And that slot is the sort of basic damage. It's 2 for a shoddy Molotov and 4 for a super Molotov. That's the damage before you add in the relevant attribute for the attacker. So if they're hit with a shoddy Molotov, they'll be taking 2 damage every turn on their turn. And if they're hit with a super Molotov, they'll be taking 4 damage every turn on their turn. So, having done that, we need to display the fact that they're on fire, or at least I chose to do that. And we also, of course, need to make that damage happen. So let's have a look at print distances. This is where we display the fact that a given enemy is on fire. And it's very straightforward. It's just we look at where we're printing the enemy. So it's something like enemy 2, enemy 3, whatever it may be. Then we look in enemy W6, and if that's greater than 0, we just have bracket on fire, end bracket. This won't be in the final game, by the way, because the idea in the final game is to have a picture display, a visual display. He may add graphics for it being on fire, or he may not, but either way, this is the text version of it. We just sort of have that in brackets after the name of the enemy. And so finally, we need to make them actually take that damage. And I decided they'd take it at the beginning of their turn. That's probably the easiest way to work it out. So we're going to go over to somewhere we haven't been for a while, which is enemy. This is where it's an enemy's go. So the first thing we do is we, as the note says, burning damage. If enemy INI underscore who 6 is greater than 0, then we say enemy 3 takes 2, sorry, INI underscore who is short for who has initiative, so it's which character is acting. If we're in the enemy passage, then we know that an enemy is acting. If this particular enemy is taking burning damage, we give a message that says enemy 3, for example, takes 2 burning damage, or whatever it is. And then we reduce their hit points by that amount. Minus equals means we set the new value to be the old value minus whatever's on the right-hand side here. So it's the same thing as plus equals, but in the other direction. And then, now you might think we'd have a check to see if they're dead in here, but it's just the way that the ifs and else ifs are set out. It's easier to do it this way. We say if enemy INI underscore who 2 is less than 1, which will only happen because of burning damage, because if their hit points are below 0, they shouldn't get to this passage in the first place. So it's only if they were alive, but the burning damage finished them off. If that's the case, we go to this new passage called enemy dies on their turn. And if that's not true, then we check to see if they're shocked and lose a turn. Otherwise, we do the normal stuff where we find a target to attack and choose an attack and so on. So let's have a look at this enemy dies on their turn. This is actually, it's a new passage, but it's not new code. What happens is when the enemy strikes, they can do a critical failure, or as this game calls it, a long failure, and injure themselves. And they could actually technically it wouldn't happen very often, but will happen sometimes, and therefore we have to code it. That 1 hit point damage might finish them off. And so I had a bunch of code to do with what happens if an enemy dies on their turn from that circumstance. But that code was exactly the same for dealing with them dying of burning damage. So I put it in a separate passage, and instead of having the code in here, I just have that include. And then I also have the include up here in the case where they burn to death. So what happens in enemy dies on their turn? Well, it's pretty straightforward. We just tell the player that this enemy is dead. If they were hovering, well, that's one less, because we need to keep track of how many enemies are hovering in a given place, because there are stacking limits. There are limits to how many you can have in one place at one time. And so we need to reduce that by one because there's one of them's just died. Or if they're on the ground, we need to reduce the number that's on the ground. And then we need to go to another passage, which we already had, which is any enemies left. This is what we do to see if the player has won the combat. Because, of course, normally what will happen is, well, this enemy is dead. They died on their turn, so obviously they don't get an attack. Obviously the next character will have a go. But, of course, if every enemy is dead, there's no point having the next character have a go. The combat is over. So first we need to check if the combat is over. I won't go through this in detail because we've already done it, but it basically checks whether any enemy is still alive, and if so, we just go to next action, and that will happen most of the time. But if not, we go to a special passage for the player having won. And so that is yet another special attack. It's the burning damage that Molotovs do. I still have at least one that I still have to code, which is there are some weapons that can target every enemy in a single range band rather than just one. So that's probably what I'm going to do next. But I will leave it there for now. As always, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.